It is really a delight to be here, and even just to thank Pastor Wallace and the NAYNET team for inviting me to share a few thoughts on leading the next generation, And as you've heard, I am not part of that generation, but I love that generation, and I'm very passionate to serve that generation. So we'll be going with a few slides, and the team will help me as we go along. East Africa is a very youthful region. About 80% is estimated to be about 147 million East Africans who are below the ages of 35, with a median age of 17.6, with Uganda being the youngest at 16 and Kenya being one of the older ones at 19. This range of the youthful part of our continent helps us realize that we actually are a very young continent, and especially a region as East Africa. According to the East Africa Youth Survey report by the Aga Khan University, which had some very insightful findings. It examined values, identity, integrity, political participation, education, aspirations, employment, youth and governance, and the future. And one of the things that comes out of that report is that as a leader, you must be able to lead these globally minded, socially driven digital natives who comprise a large portion of our population in a different way. And so as we explore how do we lead this next generation, we must also remember that they are very different. And thankfully, Kingston has done a great job of trying to break down this generational ages to help us, and so to help me also just move on with where we are going. So before we lead them, we must understand who they are. And so let me share a few things of understanding this next generation, because you cannot lead a people you do not understand. You must understand who they are, where they're coming from, where they're going, before you can lead them. Number one is the environment. The next generation is about leading in the most turbulent times of any generation. This is a generation that has faced COVID and many other turbulent times politically and others. This generation is also that generation that looks at how to master change and resilience. There's always constant change, politically, geopolitical, volatility. If you look at our neighbors, everybody is fighting, and across the continent, and the wars that are going on, technological disruptions. And this is happening every day. When everybody was settling down, AI has come, and it has disrupted everything else that we are doing. And then there's economy. The economy is facing a lot of battering, political uncertainty, and many other things. And so for you to stay here, you must master and stay on top of these major forces of change that define the characteristics of the next generation of leaders. The second thing we see here is the disposition of these leaders. How do they look like? A leading Gen Z team is one of the most difficult things. It's not all about adapting, but it's about harnessing and this boundless innovation they bring on the table. This is the most innovative generation that we've had ever lived. And when you look at the creativity, look at social media and the things they do. And I like Kenyans, but everything they see, whether it's a political thing, where it's a disaster, there's a way they can spin it around, create something nice around it, and something we can all laugh about, even in very difficult times. So before we look at how then do we lead them, what are some of the challenges of leading this next generation? Because it is not always easy to lead this generation, as much as we have said about all these other things. And let me just build up a little before we can land and see how then do we lead them. Challenges of leading the next generation. You can go to the next slide. Number one, this generation wants to communicate every day and have open communication. You know, it is the first generation that has the 24/7 internet communication. We know a bit of the millennials just before that also had this internet. But this is a generation where people have been born and only know how to communicate through the internet. The preferred mode of communication is digital. And Gibson was telling you how somebody has to choose between a job and going to the gym. And even when they have to look at something they have bought, they look for it on a digital space rather than looking on it on print. While the other older generation like myself prefer face-to-face communication at work and any other space, this generation favors the electronic communication. But also, this generation, because they like open generation, then that creates a new challenge, because a generation before them, the generation of our fathers, when I grew up, the communication was very simple. You are there to be seen, but not to be heard. But this generation wants to sit and engage with you. And I have grown a lot just sitting and learning from my own sons, because they want to sit and engage with me. And sometimes I'm wondering, do you really know that I'm your father? But that is a kind of generation alone. They're challenging the status quo of the norms that we have, and they are looking and just cultivating a very different work environment that with varied ideas and opinions, that they want these opinions to be part of their conversations every single day. But number 3, they have also very shorter attention spans. Our attention is falling every single day. It is hard to get somebody to sit and read through a chapter of a Bible. In fact, when I was writing my book, I tested it with my 2 sons. And they told me, please, Dad, do not write a big book. And so after I put up a book, and it's a small book, I took it to my younger son, who is 21 years, and I told him, Jeremy, is this enough? He said, now, this is good. This is the first book I'm going to read cover to cover. So I told him, how long are you going to read it? He told me 6 months. It's not even 200 pages. In this age, the internet, the social media, and instant gratification is what is the forefront. Everything is about, we want everything now. We have fast food. We don't want to go and wait for food and cook and wait. We want to go into a fast food. And if we have an opportunity, we want the drive-in. Don't come out of your car. Just sit in the comfort of your car. Order. By the time you get to the next window, the food is ready. They don't like to go and queue in banks. They want mobile banking. They don't want to go to school. They want masomo. Why? Because everything must be instant. They don't want time. Shorter concentration spans. They're easily distracted. Everything is a distraction, popping out in every space they are. When on the phone, some exciting things are coming up all the time and keeping them engaged, and that is quite challenging. I don't know, the slides are not coming up, so I'll keep going until they come up. Yeah, good. So number 3 is the preference of autonomy. The Gen Zs and other millennials favors autonomy and independence in their workplace. And you know, in many spaces, a lot of the leadership are older people who want to have control. But this younger generation wants autonomy. They don't want strict rules. They don't want micromanagement. They just say these things don't work for them. They want to be given time. You come to work when you want to come. Don't give me an 8 to 5 job. I want to come when I feel I am ready to come to work, and then I leave when I want to leave. But they're also purpose-driven. Growing up during the COVID crisis, recession, and other social and economic downturns, the Gen Z has witnessed uncertainty firsthand. It is expected they will prioritize a good salary, but not this generation. Because my generation, if we're going to look for a job, we prioritize what is the salary package. What else does it come with? But this generation are not looking for salaries or stability. I have a team here in Kenya, and I was even looking today, just before I came here, I was signing off the payroll. And I looked at how many of us are on pension, and I just smiled. because it was myself and 2 other people. The rest of the people do not want to be on pension. Why? Because pension suggests that you are here to stay forever. You're waiting for retirement. And now they don't want to be having that space where they're thinking about going into retirement. They want to be a place where everything is quick and fast. The lure of high salaries is not what they are looking for. Gen Z are looking for a purpose-driven environment where they're inclined to have a meaningful role and the place they play and participate in the governance and the contribution to what comes to that organization. But they're also very entrepreneurial. This is a generation that is most entrepreneurial. They don't want to be employed. They want to run their own organization. They want to have startups. It is the highest startup generation you have. Everybody wants to do their thing on their own. And because of that entrepreneurial spirit, they find it so difficult to sit and work in an organization. Why? Because it is going to put them down. It's going to give them rules and walls that they do not want. They want to break the walls and go out. They want to innovate, they want to create, they want to take risks. But when you work in an organization that has a boss and has rules and has a board and all those things, then it's not very easy to do some of those. So they're also likely to explore the non-traditional career paths. This is the generation that you'll find somebody has done law, but they prefer to become a DJ. Somebody has done architecture, and they prefer to go and be a singer or something else, or be an artist or a model, something that is very different from a generation and generations before. Because the generations before, your success was determined by the kind of career you were having. Were you a doctor, an engineer, and other things? In fact, I always smile when I read, when the results have come out, the KCSE exams results have come out, and many of the top students are asked, what do you want to be, a doctor, an engineer? But when you follow them down the line, many of them never become that. They join the social part, they become DJs, they become MCs, and they do other things that are more exciting than what they actually did. So it tells you a lot of it is just driven by what the parents want. But we also know that this generation is the digital natives. And I think Gibson talked much about the digital natives. They were born in the days of technology. Technology is their DNA. It is part of them. They were born when technology was there. When I was born and growing up, a phone was a foreign thing. In fact, I remember when the telephones began to come into this mobile telephone, it began to come in this country. I was working for an advertising company. And because I was at a senior level, we were given phones. And for a month, I could not spend 3,000 because I had nobody to call, because all my friends didn't have it. That's the time, a Safaricom line, you bought it for 60,000. Today, many of them, you either get it for free or you pay 50 shillings. Things have changed. But they also embrace diversity. This is a generation that wants to advocate for diversity, inclusivity, and equality. They want everybody to be the same. If they're in an organization, they are pushing for equality and equity. It is a generation where they want everybody included, whether you are from a different culture, tribe, race. They want to be part of it. They appreciate workplaces that embrace and celebrate their differences, making that crucial idea, fostering inclusive environment. So it is a space where they're not looking at where do you come from? What is your second name? In fact, it's the generation that most of them do not know the second name of their friend. But in the generation we come from, the first thing people meet you and ask you, where do you come from? Now, if you're a dark guy like myself, people always conclude you're coming from a certain region in the lakeside. Well, I may not even be from there. But that is how people see it. But then they're looking for all this. But they're also looking for this environment where all voices are heard and valued. And that is a very difficult space when you're working in an environment where you have older people who do not value the voices of younger people, whether it is in church, whether it is in a government office, wherever it is. But also, what they also look for, they want to look for this racial diversity beyond just an aesthetic representation. You know what an aesthetic representation is? Where we just say, well, we have something we have hung on the wall. We say that everybody is included, and we have mottos and we put up some things on the wall, but we don't live it. When you come into the organization, you don't see it. When you look at the leadership, it is skewed towards one, either demography, only men, or it's a mix of some men, but older ones and a few women and all that. They want a representation of that. And so this diversity runs across the organizational structure, the processes, and the culture that the organization runs through. The other thing is social responsibility. This generation is very concerned about social responsibility. And in the report that Gibson was sharing earlier, the Open Generation, is a report we brought out last year. One of the things that the Gen Z talk about is social justice. And they want to see, they're looking at the environment, they want to plant trees, they want to make sure that the environment is good, and other things. There's equity, people who are deprived find spaces. And so when these young people come into an organization, they want to know, do you have something about social responsibility? How do you treat the environment? What is my involvement in this environment? What do you value as an organization and a company? And that is very important for them. Then there's flexibility. They're growing up in a gig economy. You know what a gig economy is? That economy that includes short-term employment, contractual jobs, independent contractors. This is what they love. They don't want what is called permanent employment, which has a lasting thing, which does not have an end date. Because you're employed until you retire, or until you die, or until you are fired, you're still an employee. They don't like this. They want something that is short-term. Tell me what I want to do in the next 3 months. Don't tell me about the next 1 year. So with all this, they want to work from home. With all these staycations and all these things, they would rather be on a beach, but working on a very serious proposal of how to win the rest of the world. And we'll be sending you selfies of just how they've been surfing, and they get some good idea and send it to you. Why? Because there's increased connectivity. There is emergence of concept of everywhere is a workplace. So you don't have to go into an office. And I have seen it in my own office. After COVID, we tried going back to a 5-day week, and it's been a difficult one. Why? Because they don't want to be caged in one space. And so we have compromised where half of the week we're in the office, half of the other week we are at home. But I'm not sure where they are many times, whether they are on the beach, whether they're in the office, wherever they are somewhere. So I just have to trust God that they're working and doing. And so for them, it is not a work-life balance, but it's a work-life blend. How do we blend these two things? How do we make sure that I'm having fun at the same time I am working? But for an older generation, it's how do you work, a work-life balance, where I need to know I have this number of hours at home, this number of hours at work, this number of hours going to have some leisure. They're plugged in anywhere, in a coffee shop and anything. And if you look at many of our coffee shops today, they offer spaces that people are able to work. Those are the places they want to work. They will rather leave an office you are paying for and go and sit in the coffee shop that is next door, because there's more fun around there, and I can grab a coffee when I want to, and the environment is exciting. I see new people coming in and walking out, rather than sitting in an office, 4 walls that are boring and are not able to help me. So what is the implication of this next generation to the leaders? What are the implications? So what we see here is that, number one, leadership has significantly evolved over the last 10 to 15 years in correlation to the dynamics and the complexity of this changing world. The differences between the previous and the current leadership styles are stark. And the spectrum on which they are defining the characteristics of leadership are evolving in a very broad way. And let me give you some of the things that create this, some of the shifts that have brought this broad implication of things that are changing. Number one, this dramatic evolution is from transactional leadership to a space of strategic leadership. What is the strategy around it? How can we think about strategy? So it is not about how do we fulfill certain goals that we have, and how do we make sure whatever you have done, I pay you, we finish the transaction. Number two, it is from situational leadership to the broad, all-encompassing leadership. So it is not how, where you are, it is how can we create a bigger space that we can think differently, look at things differently, and engage differently. But also from that authoritative leadership, where the leader has the full authority, they give commands, they give rules, they give direction to things, to a collaborative space. Can we come and discuss? I remember earlier on when I started hiring this digital generation, I struggled a lot because I thought, I have decided, why are we coming to discuss? Because this is not your space, it is my space. But that is what the leadership change is all about. It is from that power-driven personality to, from power-driven to personality and ethics-driven. So how do you think about the individual person? How do you think about that person in the office? And then what are the ethics around it? Is it right to do it? Why? Because remember, they are also very high on justice. And so they want to make sure that everything we are doing that is also looking at the justice part of it, how does it impact the rest of society? It is moving from the narrow scope of leadership to a wide scope of influence. How can we create influence in multiple spaces? How do we ensure that we are not caged in one space? How can we be on social media? How can we be on Instagram? How can we be on Facebook? How can we be on TikTok? How can we also do some AI, some metaverse thing, and make sure you are in diverse spaces? It is also moving from the confrontational to a participatory, empowering approach. So where it is not about somebody is confronting you, how did you finish this job? Did you have this deadline? Did you meet it or didn't you meet it? Into that space where we are all participating. So we co-create together and we empower everybody to do something within the team. It is also moving from the short-term focus to a long-term lens, looking at the bigger picture. How will we think about it? In next year, if something changes in our technology, how prepared are we? What kind of gadgets can we develop? What kind of systems and processes can we have that also enable that? And so when you look at it, the definition and yardsticks of success for the next generation of leadership has evolved from just what has been witnessed in the generation before. Just about 10, 15 years ago, the way we measured how success is and how success is measured today is very difficult. Think about the guy who is working at home. How do you measure how effective they are working? It's very hard. It's very qualitative. But you know, when they're in the office, you can say you've moved this and this and that and the other. But this is what we have to deal with, and this is what we must adapt to as leaders and look at this new way of doing, moving from the traditional benchmarks of achieving targets and objectives. And now just looking at how can we make sure that every space we create is a creative space where we begin to look at different measurements of ensuring that we do and get the results we desire. You may be getting tired and bored of what I'm saying, so let me give you a few tips of how to lead in this new generation. And you must remember that there's no one size that fits all strategy in this generation. Everything must be curated to the space that you are in a way that works, because no two Gen Zs do things the same way. And you must begin to curate every little space the way you need to curate it and make sure it is working. And look at those collective experiences and that impact our behaviors, shared beliefs, and expectations, and then recognize the impact that it brings. but also underscoring the fact that there's an urgency of adjusting to the approach of our leadership, because this generation is growing and growing. Now we have Gen Alpha. We have not yet curated because they're still very young. But in another few years, to lead this generation, it will be so difficult. Why? Because you have one generation, Gen Z, then you have another Gen Alpha who think so differently. And again, they think in a way that is not conventional to the way we do our leadership. And so if you're a senior pastor here or you run an organization, you must begin to think differently. Very recently, I was with a senior pastor who was telling me that they're finding it very difficult to find any young people to take over jobs of where their vacancies were falling in one of the assemblies. So I asked him, Bishop, what is the problem? You are an organization that is 50 years plus. Why is it that you do not have people to fill in? And he said something that saddened my heart. He said, they are not ready. Now, the idea is not that they were not ready, but it's because in his mind, the way leadership has been curated, he has to go through a certain process. You came in as an intern, you finished internship. Then after that, you are employed as an assistant pastor. Then after you finished, you became a pastor. Then when you finished the pastor, you became a deputy senior pastor. Then, because it's a curated system, you have to go through a process. Now you have one young guy who comes in and he's saying he's a pastor, he's working in your office with a pair of jeans and ripped jeans. And you're a bishop who works in a 3-piece suit with a tie every single day and with shining shoes. And this guy has sneakers that you don't even know the color because he has never washed them since he bought them. You don't know whether they're gray, brown, or whatever color they are. It calls for a different way to lead. So number one, how do you lead? One tip is embrace technology. The Gen Z's work and their life evolve around technology. And so you cannot run away from it. And I remember COVID was one wake-up call for the church, but I'm not sure whether the church still remains relevant to that space. Because when COVID came, the church was struggling. And I remember we spent a whole month just taking churches, helping them to take their ministries online. And we thought that churches have now learned to go online. But today, many of them just went back to what they knew. If you need a meeting, can we meet in church at this particular time? Yet that meeting is a 15-minute meeting. It will take you 2 hours to take a bus ride to go there. But they will not do it. So we need to embrace technology. To lead effectively, we must embrace technological innovations and to integrate them in our daily work routine. There are churches now globally that are testing how to do church with AI. I don't know how they will do that, and we are trying to study how that will happen. But because this is where the world is, and you can ignore it, but you will be left behind, and you must catch up. Number two, be a mentor and a guide. While Gen Zs prefer autonomy, research shows us that they also seek supportive and robust mentors in their workplace, their ministry, and their social lives. So, on one hand, they want to have autonomy, but on the other hand, they're looking for mentors who can guide them and direct them into the places they want to go. A study was done of about 7,000 young people aged between 13 to 25, and 82% of them said they will prefer to be under a supervisor who provides them guidance and mentoring every single day. So you will think that because you want autonomy, you do not want anybody to supervise, but many of them. Why is it important? Because they provide constant feedback to them, regularly communicating with them how they're doing, and then showing a genuine interest and about their lives and where they're going, their aspirations, and everything they're dreaming about. And you see, this is a big thing about this generation because they want validation. And now, if you don't have a mentor and you're working alone, who validates you? But if you have a mentor, he will tell you you're doing well, you're running well, keep going. And so you need that because they need validation. But number three, you need to lead with empathy. As a leader, you must be empathetic to everybody who comes across all generations, more so for the Gen Z, because they have a generation of high stress, intense competition, shorter attention spans, and everything is bombarding their minds, especially because of social media. And so you find that because of that, a lot of them have mental challenges. It's the age where we are talking about mental wellness. And so, if you want to win this generation, you must be there to empathize with what they are going through. You know, when I was growing up, if I told my mother I want to hang myself, she will bring me a rope and say, enda ujinyonge. In this generation, you cannot risk doing that. You do that, they will actually hang themselves. The next thing is you must prioritize mental well-being. While this is a very gloomy start, that this generation is the one which has a lot of mental challenges, but I also want to say it is a generation I admire a lot. Why? Because it is a generation that is able to talk about their mental challenges. Because many other generations, people don't talk about their mental challenges. In fact, in our time when growing up, people who had mental challenges did not believe they had mental challenges, because the only person who had a mental challenge was a person who was walking on the street naked. We call them a madman, isn't it? But yet we had many mad people walking clothed. So it is that generation that is open to talking about their mental health, but also seeking professional help. But also because of this hybrid working, team building activities are not there. So there's a lot of challenges. They have also very mentally aware. They go online and recognizing all these things. But also they want to recognize the spirituality within this space. So if you're a leader, you must prioritize mental well-being. If you can have a counselor on your team or find somebody who comes to speak about mental wellness, then you will be able to lead this generation. So what are some of the critical factors of success for leading this generation? And I'm soon coming to an end. For those who are looking at me and wondering when lunch is coming, it is coming soon. Number one, you must be purpose-driven. Leaders must have a focus, a clear personal vision, that also a shared vision and clarity of where they are going. The generation is looking for leaders who have a clear direction, not just to say, come, let's trust the Lord. Let us wait on God. When, there's sometimes when there's an ambiguity that they don't like. But secondly, it's resilience. Effective and efficient way to manage change. And always staying ahead of the curve is a very important part of being a leader. Are you able to manage the changes that are coming today? We have come through COVID. Who knows what comes next? And we are seeing everybody is fighting across the world. Maybe there could be a war that is coming. We have no idea. Flooding is everywhere. Who knew that one day Dubai will be flooded until they don't know what to do? But this is the reality about the change that is happening all the place. So you must be resilient as a leader, being able to move from one challenge to the other, moving from one high to another. But also creating networks, constantly building network of leaders and that you're able to help build you as a leader so that you are not a lone ranger as a leader, learning from others. What are you doing with those young people within your space? How are you coping with these millennials and all these Gen Zs? What are you doing? Being able to create a network where you can tap in. And NAYNET is one good space. If you're a leader, please belong here because it's a space that offers you that network and being able to learn. But also being able to be long-term, having the long-term lens, having a futuristic vision, always thinking and planning and executing strategy. And now, this thing should not be just something from the heart where you say, I feel. What is the strategy? Young people want to see, where are you taking us? What is the long-term goal? Where will we achieve when we are going that direction? And so that is an important value. The other value is adaptivity. Are you able to manage disruptions effectively? Because any leader worth their soul must be able to be adaptive, be able to adapt to the changing times and changing things. You know, the word of God is everlasting, but we live in an ever-changing society where everything is changing. And so the methods we used last year will not suffice for us to use next year. Our methods must be adaptive to where we are going, to the generations and the things that are happening within the spaces we are. Because our God is a constant God, but He is a God of creativity that allows us to do new things and innovate in our spaces as the times come. And finally, there must be a value orientation. How do you look at the values that the organization have? Is there an ethical practice within the organization? One of the things that young people struggle is when they look at older people like ourselves and we preach one thing but do another thing. We do not live and walk the talk. Young people are looking for leaders who will walk the talk so that if they say you do this, they also see you doing it. And so you must be a value-oriented leader who holds on, who leads, who sustains and grows the organization through consistency and continuity. So in conclusion, what am I saying? Next generation leaders are tasked with becoming different and becoming better. We cannot remain the way we are. We have to become different, but we also become better. The forces that will test our mental and our character of the next generation are no longer just organization-specific, category-specific, or industry-specific. So where we are talking about we in the church, now we must be able to think about cross-cutting structures. That person who comes to your church, who works in an IT organization, that person who works in the entertainment industry, that person who is a pastor at the same time, they're vocational doing something else. Can you think about that so that it's not industry specific? How can we bring the Lord Jesus to the spaces we go every single day? How can the marketplace be expanded beyond the church four walls? They have to be much bigger, more comprehensive, and more impactful in their ability to be able to deal with the disruptions that come. But also great leaders are defined by the ability to unite groups, individuals around a shared vision. Because of this nature of this volatile generation, you must work intentionally as a leader to be able to foster unity within the group. Because remember, if you have a team that is working from home, you don't know how they're working. You can't say we have a dress code. You can't say we take tea at this time. You can't say we break for lunch at this time. So there's all sorts of diversity that you must be able to face as a leader and be able to harness them together and do that using empathy, understanding, and all that versatility so that you can effectively lead this young generation and fill them with the hope that God is asking us to do. Also, leading this generation requires a high degree of emotional intelligence. And so as leaders, we must be able to learn emotional intelligence. We must be able to move in the space where our emotional intelligence is high. And if you do not have good emotional intelligence, you're going to struggle because of their way. They do not have a systematic way they work and do things. If you do not have, you'll be shouting and doing all sorts of things all the time. But we have to have high emotional intelligence. But we also need to be agile to be able to facilitate these remote team collaborations. So the organization I work for example, I have a team here in Nairobi, and our operations team is run from Johannesburg. Then we have a main finance team in London. And so you find that all these things are just spread out, but yet we still run as an efficient organization. What about your team? You may find your IT manager sits at home, the other person who comes to the office, the other one is seated in shags somewhere. But how do you create a very collaborative team in all this. You need a bit of agility and be able to move with speed when things begin to change. But also, leaders must be able to be courageous, because in these times and age, you must be able to take many courageous decisions. And this is the mark of a leader of the next generation, that you are able to step in and take courageous decisions. And these courageous decisions sometimes can be many to take, but important to do it. And as we look at this, the future of the complex, fragmented, competitive environment, constantly evolving world, it is imperative that every articulated long-term view of what an organization, the church, the ministry, and whatever God has placed us must be able to look at where is God taking us and what is God doing in our generation. As I finish, let me borrow from the words of Solomon in Proverbs 2:6-8. He says, "For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints." And so if you're lacking wisdom of how to lead this next generation, I may say many things and you remember one or two things. In fact, research tells us after a summit like this, after 3-4 days, after 10 days, you'll only remember 10%. What is the 10% you're going to remember? Is it going to be my spectacles? Is it my shoes? Or whoever Carrie, how she was doing? Or what is it that is going to remember? You may forget many things, but the Bible gives us a way out. It says, "For the Lord gives us wisdom." Are you lacking wisdom of how to lead this generation? Go to the Lord. He says, "From his mouth come knowledge and understanding." And this is a generation you cannot afford to be ignorant. Where you say, "I don't watch news." That is not a good thing to do in this kind of generation, because all these tools are in our hands. You can find this knowledge. And if you don't know where to find it, ask God. He will tell you, go to YouTube and find so and so, Dr. Luke, who has written this and this kind of thing. And you will find that knowledge and find the understanding that you need to have. But he says God stores up sound wisdom. So he gives wisdom, but he also gives sound wisdom. And he says, "For the upright." Are you an upright one for the Lord? Are you living upright as a leader? Because if you're not living upright, then you don't have this sound wisdom that God gives. But he's also a shield to those who walk uprightly. God will defend you as you make those decisions. As you go about, he will walk behind you. He'll be a shield for every dart that will be thrown at you. He'll walk beside you. He'll embrace you and walk, because he says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." He'll be a light unto your feet. Where you're going, he will illuminate the path. And the voice will say, "Do not turn to the left or right. Walk ye this way." Why? Because he is a shield, and he guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. And with that, I want to say, friends, we live in a generation that is changing every day. It's an ever-changing generation. The word of God remains everlasting. But God is asking me and you to creatively look to the spaces he has called us to, so that we may lead that generation that is coming. There's nothing new that God has not seen. Every generation will come with different nuances. But the God we have, the same God yesterday, today, and forever, will give us knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The Bible talks about the sons of Issachar, who had two important characteristics. They knew the times, but also they understood the times, but they also knew what to do. Do you know what to do with the generation that God is giving you to lead? God bless you.
Amen.